Hi, welcome to the History Talks. I'm your host, Will, and this is Sebastian. In this episode, we're going to be continuing our discussion on Napoleon's rise to power and the French Revolution. Sebastian, would you like to start out from where we left off last time?
Yes, before we begin, I would like to make a correction from last video. Last video, I said that Robespierre created the cult of reason, whereas as opposed to the cult of logic. I mixed up the names. The opposition cult was the cult of reason. Robespierre's cult was called the cult of the supreme being. Anyways, back to
very good. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. And yeah, let's get back to where
Yes.
we left off.
So when we left off, Napoleon had left Egypt, and we were about to describe Napoleon's reign domestically, how he was like back at home at France. So Napoleon, one of his biggest legal inventions was creating the Napoleonic Code. Now, the Napoleonic Code, what you have to understand is that Napoleon, he liked his legacy as a conqueror and all, but really, what he wanted his legacy to be was as like a great ruler. You know, he kind of, in that sense, models himself after Justinian. Justinian, who is by far my favorite Roman emperor, was infamous for creating the Justinian Code, which is this legal code that is, well, almost every legal code that you can look at today that like a modern state uses can trace itself back to, you know, the Justinian Code.
Okay, so let's talk about what age is Napoleon at this point?
So I want to say, so the Napoleonic Code was officially created in 1801. Though Napoleon is starting to get, you know, more like his 30s, you know, around that time.
He's probably in his mid-30s at this point, right? And so he's proven himself through military conquest. He's gained power through that, and now that he's in this position of power, he's looking at starting to leave a legacy, and he's doing that by things like creating a code of laws that he'll be remembered for. Okay.
Yeah. So the Napoleonic Code, you know, it has some influence on modern legal systems. You know, certainly a lot of like the West, especially, and also to an extent, you know, the East, and definitely also some parts of Africa. You know, property laws do have a strong basis in the Napoleonic Code in most of the world, and maybe not all the Napoleonic Code was as influential as, say, the Justinian Code, but, you know, France's legal system still has great influences from Napoleonic Code. Louisiana actually calls their code the Napoleonic Code, or at least yeah.
Okay. You're saying they actually use that in court documents, for example, because they have
or at the very least
a legal system or a code of laws there that is inspired more by the French system than by the English system.
Yeah, or at the very least, it's called the Napoleonic Code. You know, it certainly has strong influences from that, but also some influences from, you know, English common law and how that evolved into the American system.
Right. Okay.
So, back to Napoleon. If we talk about industrialization, which is a key point in this time period, because England is really the only one who's like seeing significant industrialization. Well, and America, but you see, industrialism is something some people credit Napoleon some with, but Napoleon, he was not as industrial as, you know, some people would like to believe him to be. You know, his nephew, if we like look 50 years later down the line after Napoleon's death, his nephew Napoleon III would eventually be an industrialist. But Napoleon, he did not participate that much in the Industrial Revolution. He certainly participated in, like, you know, the more military side of it. You know, like he tried as hard as he could to get in on new military innovations and maybe develop some of his own. Though factories, you know, France took some time to really get into that and sewage and all that.
So do you think there was any reason for that? Is there a reason? Was he intentionally avoiding industrializing France, or was it just simply he just he didn't see the value in it, or was there some specific reason?
I think it's a mixture of not seeing value and how difficult it actually was. Because, we look at industrialization today, especially with our modern technology and stuff, and we look, hey, you just gotta organize people, make some certain laws, like the Enclosure Act that England made, and boom, you get people going into cities and starting factories and start innovating machinery. But you see, the industrial revolution's hearth in England is very important, actually, because England does not want anyone else getting access to this industrial revolution. America somehow manages to get their hands on it in like the 1790s, but England is Britain is very strict to make sure that it does not get outside of the British Isles. They have
Okay, and when you say get outside, you're talking about the intellectual property, or the basically the knowledge they had of how to create factories and assembly lines and this sort of thing. And so they wanted to. So maybe that was a part of it too. Maybe, is it possible that maybe Napoleon wanted this technology, he just didn't have access to it, and the English were making an effort to make sure that he did not have access.
Oh, almost certainly that was if not all of it, at least most of it or a big part of it.
So it may have more to do with just access rather than willingness or desire.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. One thing Napoleon does do is he institutes what many historians consider the first modern draft. And I say modern draft to contrast it with the medieval levy system. So in the medieval era, we're going all the way back to Charlemagne and the Vikings and William the Conqueror. Back then, if you look back then, what you see is a system where you have a noble or a lord or a king or whatever. The king calls on his nobles, who calls on their peasants, and certain serfs are like, hey, it's let's get as many peasants as we can and form this disorganized army. If you have any weapons, grab them. If not, resources are kind of tight. We might make you some chainmail or something. I don't know.
Right. So one of the Lord's men comes door to door knocking and saying, "Come on, you're gonna fight."
Yeah.
Essentially, right.
So Napoleon had. So after that, it's just pretty much we get some volunteers for the mill. So modern militaries in the 17th and 16th centuries, it's more about creating standing armies of trained troops, sometimes even mercenaries if you're looking towards more Italy. Napoleon creates the first modern draft, as you think of it. He institutes this policy called levée en masse, where everyone comes to join the army, except they get proper training, they spend some time, training how to do this, how to do that, and then they're put into proper organized regiments, and then they're put into the army properly. And this is why it's considered the first modern draft. It's a properly organized army with a properly organized system where the state from the capital calls upon the people, and if you're young, then you get your letter and you're conscripted into the army. So you go to get your training, and then you're put into the army.
Okay, so in order to be sending these letters out, they must have had some sort of they must have been maintaining some sort of list of all the names of all the citizens. Is that they had some sort of extensive census at this point? Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe census was part of the Napoleonic Code.
That must have that was part of the Napoleonic Code, and he probably implemented that specifically so that he could have a draft, because then now he has this list. You can say, oh, let's take all the what ages were drafted at that time. What was it?
I believe from I'm not sure.
Something like 16 to 25 or something.
That sounds reasonable to me, though I would have to do research.
Well, let's just say with the exact number, we're just going to estimate. We're going to say something like, okay, so then he has these census takers going around specifically for the purpose of gathering information, so that he can then say, okay, I want to draft all the boys and young men from the ages of 16 to 25. We're gonna send them letters. We know where they live. We're gonna go find them all, and then tell them you have to report at this time and date, to serve your country.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he basically institutes the system that would eventually inspire the system, America used in, say, Vietnam or World War II.
Okay.
And
which is where you register. You register like on a birthday. For example, how we have something on your 18th birthday, you're supposed to register.
Yeah.
Okay, so they may have had something like that where you're required to go register. Okay.
Yes. So because Napoleon has this conscription policy, he has the largest army in Europe at this time. His army consists, at its height, of 700,000 troops. And not only was this
what was the population of France at this time?
I'd have to look that up.
Okay. I mean, it's got to be massive. It must have been much how large could it have been? What percentage of the population is this? Has got to be a very significant percentage of the population.
I mean, here's the thing: Napoleon did not only conscript from France; he conscripted from all of his puppet states.
Oh, okay.
In fact,
And how was he able to do? I mean,
because he's this powerful conqueror who has all these puppet states that he is the protector of, but are still technically, self-governing republics.
And people were willing to do this, or they were basically just forced with a gun in their back. Hey, you're gonna fight for us, or we're gonna shoot you.
Yes.
Oh yes, it was like that. It was a forced conscription.
Or it was forced, but you just kind of did it, and Napoleon tried to use this to bring more unity to his empire, because, if you have Germans and French and Spanish fighting on the same side, they're not Germans, French, and Spanish anymore, they're Napoleon's army.
Right, that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
And so what did he do with this 700,000 man army?
He basically tried to threaten Europe, he pressed Denmark, Norway, Austria, those two were forced to be his ally. Russia, he does kind of force to be his ally, but Tsar Alexander, so Russia is ruled by this guy, Tsar Alexander the First.
Okay.
Alexander the First, so when Alexander was young, he was a fan of the Enlightenment, but as he grew older, he started to see some of his flaws, and that was only exacerbated by Napoleon.
Okay.
So Tsar Alexander.
Okay, so he saw Napoleon as a product of the Enlightenment.
Yeah.
Particularly because he rose to power during the French Revolution. Okay.
Yeah, and Tsar Alexander is not exactly a fan of Napoleon, but Napoleon has 700,000 troops. So at first he takes the same route Austria does and is like, yeah, I'll be your ally, Napoleon. In fact, and at first Napoleon was like, great. In fact, I'll even let you have the part of Poland that Prussia used to own, but the rest of it is this Grand Duchy of Warsaw that is mine. Yeah, basically. So Poland has always been kind of contentious around this time. In fact, most recently, at this time, it was basically destroyed because it was divided between Prussia, Austria, and Russia in the partition of Poland. Napoleon basically cuts out the Russian and Prussian and Austrian parts because he's so powerful, and creates the Grand Duchy of Warsaw, which is another puppet state. He gives some of the rest of Prussia's part of Poland to Russia, and then he's just like, okay, Russia, be my ally, participate in the continental system. Did we talk about the continental system?
I don't believe we did. Keep going though. Keep going.
Okay.
Be right back.
So, the continental system was a system created by Napoleon that was basically an agreement to blockade Britain. Basically, British goods, you could not enter French lands. You were trading with Britain, please don't enter French lands. That includes you, America, which is actually kind of one of the causes of the War of 1812. Because both Britain and France had this policy of, America, please stop trading with my enemy, and Britain that led to war, and that did not lead to war with France because France did not have boats, and because Britain declared first.
Okay, so France did not have a navy. Is that what you're saying?
France had a navy, but
It was not a significant power. Is that what?
Yeah, Napoleon tried to make it one, but after the Battle of the Nile and this other battle near Spain,
Okay, so he started to build up one when he wanted to go and
invade England or invade Haiti.
Okay, so he did it for purposes of invading England, which he was repelled there. Then he moved a whole bunch of his soldiers across the Mediterranean over to Egypt, right?
Yeah.
Because his target was to go after India because that was a British possession.
Yeah.
And he was also defeated there. So he made a couple, and you said Haiti also. So he came across over to Haiti as well. Was that also because it was a British territory at the time?
No, it was because it was a French territory.
Oh, okay, mistake.
So after the 7 Years' War, France lost all of their colonies in North America, except for the Caribbean colonies. They got to keep Haiti, namely because while Haiti had a lot of sugar and some successful sugar plantations, the damage to the soil was starting to be noticeable.
Damage from what?
From just overworking the soil.
From over-farming, okay.
Yeah, especially because after losing Louisiana, the Kingdom of France, they basically tried to make the most out of what colonies remained, which was Haiti. So they imported all the slaves they could. They got the plantations to work as hard as they could, farming the soil, getting sugar, getting molasses, getting rum.
Okay.
And that
why did he need to send a navy over there?
Because this was the time of the Haitian Revolution. You see, during the French Revolution, France's control over Haiti was starting to destabilize.
Okay.
And the amount of slaves that had been imported into Haiti was starting to significantly outnumber the amount of white plantation owners in Haiti.
Okay.
So this is where, was probably the only successful slave uprising of this time period.
Okay. All right. So he sent in a whole bunch of boats to go with
deal with the uprising.
Deal with an uprising. Okay. So
yeah,
but you said that was also not successful for him. So
Napoleon's
the slave rebellion was successful. Napoleon's resistance to it was not successful. It was defeated. So he lost more ships there, I'm assuming. So he lost ships in Haiti. He lost ships trying to get across the English Channel over to England. He lost ships going across the Mediterranean over to Egypt.
Yeah.
And so at this point, he had made attempts at operating a navy, and at this point, it had simply been demolished, and he just didn't have anything. He had this massive land army.
Yeah.
He's on the continent there, right? So he can just march across the continent with the 700,000 man army, but there's not much he can do when it comes to sea.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's a problem for Napoleon because his main rival is the UK, and behind Napoleon's back, Russia and the UK are starting to consider the possibility of creating another coalition because the first two had been unsuccessful. But maybe, just maybe, they could take care of Napoleon. After all, the continental system at first seemed successful, but a mixture of economic downturns and the fact that smugglers were starting to figure out how to outsmart the continental system and get British goods into France had caused the system to start to break down.
Okay.
To the point where in, I believe, 1809, Napoleon had to officially abolish it.
Okay.
So that was not a successful endeavor.
Okay.
And it's starting to show where Napoleon's weakening until finally Russia breaks their alliance with France and occupies Finland, which is threatening to Napoleon. Because Norway is Denmark-Norway is one of those kingdoms that he kind of pressed into a forced alliance.
Okay.
So Finland means that Russia may have intentions with them.
Okay.
Not to mention that Russia is definitely having intentions with the Grand Duchy of Warsaw.
Okay.
So I forget who declares the war, but war breaks out between Russia and Napoleon.
Okay.
So Napoleon is like, all right, well, I have a 700,000 man army. I'm going to invade Russia with that 700,000 man army.
Okay.
He plans his invasion for spring, when Russia would be abundant with stuff, and when he would supposedly not suffer the mistakes of Charles XII.
Okay.
So he marches his army into Russia.
Okay, where is his army at this time? They spread across continental Europe, spread across Western Europe.
Or I mean, he has like garrisons all over Europe, but his main army of 700,000. He's moved it into Poland.
It's in Poland. Okay, so they're in Poland waiting for the spring,
Yeah,
and that's when they're going to launch their offensive. Okay.
yeah. So they march into Russia, except Napoleon underestimated Tsar Alexander the First
Okay.
because he had beaten all of these other great monarchs. Yusuf of Austria, he was a joke. So much for Holy Roman Emperor. The Pope, Spain. But Russia, Tsar Alexander embarked on a policy that is known as scorched earth. So when Napoleon would march his army, Tsar Alexander would just have his troops retreat and take all of the things that Napoleon's soldiers, horses, everything could eat.
This is Russian land.
Yes.
Correct. So he's basically in their own land. They're just burning everything.
Yeah.
So Napoleon's army is coming through Russia, thinking, "Oh, this is going to be easy pickings for us." And they get there. It's the spring. I'm guessing. I haven't been to Russia in the spring, but I'm guessing it's still pretty cold there. And they come, and what they find, all the farms are gone. There's no food. There's nothing for them there. So was that his problem? That he has this massive army, and he says, "Oh, now how do I feed them?"
Yeah, and soon it turned to winter with the snow.
Soon it's turned to winter. Oh, so they're marching through the spring, the summer, the fall. They're going. It's going scorched earth the whole way. So this is the Russian plan. I'm assuming to lure them in, get them deep into Russian territory in the winter. Now they have access to no food. Is that right? Okay.
Yes, because Napoleon's not stretching out his supply lines that far. He was relying on these Russian provisions, and without the food, the army was slow, dwindling. They had to leave stuff behind because not only did Russia burn the crops, but it also burnt the bridges. So they had to sometimes leave cannons in the marsh or the river because they couldn't cross. Till eventually, Napoleon's like, okay, we're near Moscow. We just have to capture the Tsar, and it'll all be worth it. So Napoleon reaches Moscow, and Moscow is empty. There are a few prisoners that Russia just doesn't want there, but other than those few prisoners, there is no food, there is no people, there is no Tsar, there is no nothing except for the architecture that was already there. And even then, that's not useful because there's no food in them. So Napoleon is just like, oh, I come all this way for nothing. I don't even know where the Tsar went because there's all the Siberia, and my troops are dying, so I have to go back to France now. So Napoleon turns his army back, embarrassed. There's this one of his generals is like, "Hey, Napoleon." One of the generals who was back in France sends this letter to Napoleon. It's like, "Hey, what happened in Russia? We haven't heard anything back." And Napoleon writes this letter back that just says, "Don't worry, I personally am fine. I have not suffered any injuries." So Napoleon marches back to France, and when he gets back to France, his army of 700,000 has been reduced to 30,000.
30,000. Wow. 30,000.
Yes.
And what was the main cause of death here?
Starvation, disease, freezing cold temperatures.
Okay, so his army,
fatigue.
This absolutely massive army did not die fighting. They died from things like disease, starvation.
Yeah,
and lack of necessities.
Yeah,
the necessities of life.
Yeah,
they didn't die fighting. Though.
Yeah, there may have been some skirmish. There may have been some Cossack skirmishers and short cavalry attacks on the way to and fro. But other than that, because Tsar Alexander knew he could not. He knew he could not fight Napoleon's army one-on-one.
Okay,
there was just no way.
He knew that he couldn't fight them, but he could starve them.
Yeah.
Okay, then that's what he did.
Yeah, so Napoleon comes back to France with an army of 30,000 beleaguered and demoralized troops. A lot of people didn't even recognize them as Napoleon's troops just because they had lost all color to their faces, all character to them, because if you're a person in France, whenever you hear Napoleon's gone on a campaign, you expect, okay, he's got to get a big army, he's going to go to this country, he's going to maybe have some difficulties, but no matter what, he's going to come back with some sort of prize that makes it worth it, and he's going to come back with an army full of of moralized troops that are happy to serve under Napoleon.
Right. Okay. He has a history of success, but he comes back here where he's had a casualty rate of that'd be over 95%.
Yeah.
And he has absolutely nothing to show for it. Just lots of death, disease, misery.
Yeah. And even the troops that had made it back were, in a bad state.
Oh, I can imagine. Okay.
Yeah. So, and eventually this turns into the war of the Third Coalition. Now it's Austria, Russia, Britain, and everyone else who is mad at Napoleon. They're fighting back. They're ready.
They see their chance. They've been waiting.
Yes.
When Napoleon had a 700,000 man army, they said, okay, we're just gonna stay back. We're not gonna fight him unless we have to. Now that they see he's been weakened, he has this much smaller army, much smaller. It's from 700,000 to 30,000, so it's roughly like 4% the size it was before, right?
Yeah.
And then you're saying this army is also demoralized.
Yeah.
So it's a much smaller demoralized army, and they say, okay, well now's our chance.
Yeah.
Now is when we can go in. We can go in our own offensive and take Napoleon out.
Yeah. So Napoleon loses at the Battle of Leipzig. A little bit before that, Russia makes his offer, and it's like, hey, if you give up your entire empire except for, the country of France, we'll let you, be in power. But Napoleon's like, no, I'm not losing my empire. That would be embarrassing, and I'd rather die fighting. So Napoleon fights at the Battle of Leipzig, and he is defeated, and he is sent to St. Elba, where he's exiled, and the French Empire has officially fallen. But then,
when he's sent to where it's St. Elba, is that what you said?
St. Elba. It's an island in the Mediterranean.
Okay, and is he because he's been crowned an emperor?
Yeah.
Does he retain that title there? Is he, for example, is he emperor of the island of Elba?
No, they strip away his titles, they don't. The other monarchs did not recognize his title in the first place.
Oh, okay. I think I had heard once that they allowed him to retain the title. Something if you had been crowned emperor, you were emperor for life, and so they said, okay, we'll make you an emperor of this island that you live on. It's a tiny island, and you live there, and you're the emperor. Maybe he had a couple servants or something.
I know they set him up to at least die happily, but I haven't heard anything about him being called Emperor of Elba or whatever.
Okay. All right.
But anyways, he doesn't remain on Elba, because as Europe is starting to organize the Congress of Vienna, as it's called, Napoleon comes back and starts what's called the 100-day Restoration, where Napoleon somehow convinces France to let him be in power again. I don't know how he did that, but he convinced.
How did he do that? He must have had some friends who helped him escape Elba, right? Because here's what he did. He got on a boat, he rowed out of Elba and back to France. How far was this?
This was not that far, because this was still northern Mediterranean.
Okay, so he was able to row himself back to France.
Yeah, he gets back to Paris.
Shows up on shore.
Yeah.
He goes back to Paris and says, hey, I'm here.
Yeah, I'm back. Now let's restore France to its former glory.
Okay.
So Napoleon gets back into power in France.
And when he shows up there, people are okay with that. They say, "Oh, hey, look, Napoleon's here. Let's elevate this guy up to the top again."
Yeah, I don't know how he convinced them to do that. At the very least, he convinced the army to do that.
I guess he still had their loyalty after his failed campaign in Russia.
Yeah. So, but then the Battle of Waterloo happens, which is infamous. Right. It's called the final defeat of Napoleon. Though some people have pointed out that a lot of English-speaking historians actually overhype the significance of Waterloo, just because it was the battle that led to Napoleon's defeat that had the most British involvement. Leipzig, it had some, but it was mainly the Russians and the Austrians and the Prussians.
Oh, so you're saying British historians like to hype up Waterloo because they want to take the credit for the striking the final blow to Napoleon.
And it's interesting because I read that at Waterloo, Napoleon was like, okay, that whole thing with Leipzig, it was a mistake to try to keep my empire. I'm just going to take this one city so that I can make a peace deal with the other European powers that where I am in favorable terms, so I can at least keep my power, keep France, maybe even keep Belgium or something, because Waterloo was in Belgium.
Okay.
And just survive. But nope, he is
That
defeated.
doesn't work.
Yeah, he is defeated at Waterloo. He is exiled to St. Helena, which is in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, so there's no way he's sailing back to anywhere.
Okay, so when he got exiled this time, they learned their lesson. They said Elba was too easy to row back from. Yeah. We're sending you further out. Okay.
Yeah, and this time, not only that, but British ships would check on the island sometimes, and
Was he there alone?
Did he had some servants to make sure he died okay, and the Pope finally lifted his excommunication while he was on St. Helena, okay. So there was a priest to give him last rites.
Okay, and did he live to old age on this island?
He died of some stomach disease.
Okay.
He actually considered being exiled to the island more embarrassing than being executed. Because with being executed, he could at least die with honor, but he felt like this was just embarrassing.
Oh, so you think that's why they exiled him specifically because he thought that was the worst punishment?
That might be it. It also might be the emperor thing. I don't know.
Okay. All right. So that was his end, huh? Did he have a nice quiet life on the island? Do we know anything about that? Or was he miserable the whole time because he just felt like this was a?
He was mostly miserable,
tormented by the fact that he had to be exiled.
He was mostly miserable. His servants were kind of nice to him. There was this one guard who really didn't like him. There was this guard who made sure that Napoleon didn't have any firewood this one night, so Napoleon had to burn one of the chairs or something. I don't know if that story is true, but I've heard that from multiple places. So.
He had a mean guard, but otherwise I wonder what he did with his time. Did he write? Did he write a memoir? Did he write?
Yeah, I think he wrote some. He looked, he remember he got that stomach disease, so he also spent some time in bed. And eventually he died. And on his coffin, they only inscribed his title as General of France.
Oh, okay.
They did not inscribe his emperorship onto his coffin.
Is that something he would have been happy with?
As general, I don't know whether he would have been happy with that.
Okay.
All I know is that something he probably would have been happy with is the fact that his coffin was delivered back to France.
Oh, okay, good. So he was buried in France.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's good.
And then after Napoleon, after all of this, Europe does something called the Congress of Vienna, which is basically where they try to redraw the map of Europe because they're like, okay, we don't want this Napoleon thing to happen again, and also he kind of ruined the map of Europe, so we need to put something there in its place. So they have this Congress where basically all diplomats from the major European powers discuss how to redraw the map of Europe with two main goals. One, to have legitimate, God-ordained divine right monarchs in power, and two, to create even more importantly, to create a balance of power. Balance of power is basically this idea that you need to have all of the states be able to balance each other out so that no one state or its alliance is powerful enough to, overthrow Europe.
So that you don't have a Napoleon marching around Europe with 700,000 soldiers.
They also,
And did that Congress of Vienna, did that have anything to do with the lead up to World War I, which came in the next century?
That is something historians love to discuss.
We should save that for another episode.
Yes.
All right.
Though
did you have any other closing words you wanted to say about Napoleon or the French Revolution?
Or I was about to say, because Napoleon was an interesting guy. He had a lot of hubris, but also a lot of talent. He went from being this tiny Italian guy who, how it's a myth that he was short. It's a myth that he was short in general. In military school, they actually did make fun of his height, though. But when he was adult, he grew up to be, normal height for the age. But he certainly wasn't short in terms of his accomplishments either. He changed the face of Europe. The Congress of Vienna map, it was actually very different from the pre-Napoleonic map, and it gave everyone a new. Napoleon was the first example in history of or in the first example of in European history of someone from like basically no background, maybe technically a background, but basically no background, rising up and becoming a legit monarch. You know, he wasn't the first to overthrow a divine right monarch as a non-divine right as a non-monarch. That was the French revolutionaries, because the French Revolution, even though it betrayed some of the core principles of the Enlightenment, ultimately proved one of the main ideas of the Enlightenment. That is, that divine right is not real, because that certainly did not protect Louis. So, and instead, the people's will ruled France.
That's something we could save for. That's a discussion we could save for another episode too.
Yeah,
discussing
the French Revolution.
The will of the people. Yeah, discussing
French
ideas of the Enlightenment, which talk about this contractual obligation to the people versus a ruler's divine right. That would be a good topic for another one. But
yeah,
I think that's a great discussion we had about Napoleon, the French Revolution, and unless you just had anything else you wanted to say about it, let's go ahead and end the episode.
Yeah. It's one important note is that just everywhere in the world there is either a direct or indirect influence from Napoleon. Latin America, that became independent because Spain was conquered by Napoleon. Asia, people need to balance the power stuff, so they start thinking about that in terms of colonies, and finally World War I was the very thing the Congress of Vienna was meant to prevent.
Yeah.
In the short term, what most historians say is that in the short term they were very successful in accomplishing their goal. However, the map that they drew did not account for future movements such as liberalism, nationalism, the revolutions of 1848, which would probably be great for another discussion.
Yes.
Revolutions for 1848.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good.
But that is all I have to say for now.
Okay, great. That was a great discussion. Thank you, Sebastian. And we will see you all again in the next episode.
Adios.